It's 1 o'clock, so I would like to welcome everyone to the Safety Coordinator Fundamentals session number 3. In this session, we will be discussing local government motor vehicle considerations and ACCG incentive and GMA safety grant requirements. I'd like to do a couple of housekeeping items first. If you have a question, please enter it into the question box, and we will make sure to answer all questions at the end of the session, or if it's something that's very pertinent to everyone, we will answer it and come on. Today's goals, what we will be covering is by the end of these 3 sessions, and this is the 3rd session, you will have the greater awareness of the duties and responsibilities of the local government safety coordinator. You will have a foundation for workplace safety with an overview of key safety functions and concepts. And you will have a template for the basic safety program using the requirements to qualify for the GMA safety grant and or the ACCG incentive program. This is the 3rd session, and you must attend all 3 sessions to receive credit for the safety attendance. So make sure you've attended all 3, and we will here as attending a safety coordinator training. We will hopefully be able to pick up in 2021 with getting the 1, 2, 3 and on. One quick item, if you have not attended all 3, on September the 29th, we will be doing a makeup session, and all sessions will be held on the 29th. Session 1, if you need to attend that, will be at 9:30 a.m. Session start at 11 a.m. And if it happened you had to step away, session 3 will start at 1 p.m. Now, what is workplace safety? In session 1, we covered the audits and self-inspections. We did the accident incident investigation, job hazard analysis, and today we're covering the local government motor vehicle considerations and the ACE incentive and GMA safety grant requirements. Our presenter today is Dennis Watts. Dennis has been with us for 18 years and is the manager of our training, communications, and public safety sector. Before we get started, though, Dennis, since you're involved in the training, especially the public safety section, in your experience, what do you think is the #1 cause of motor vehicle accidents in our local governments?
Hey, thanks. Great question, Steve. I think there are a couple of things that go along with this. #1 is the increased number of distractions, both in vehicles and on the road. Even though the state of Georgia is a hands-free cell phone state, I think all of us out on the road continually see people with their cell phones in their hands, in their ears, and doing everything else but driving. And I think these distractions coupled with speed, particularly during this COVID-19, reports are that people are driving faster than they were before. So I think distractions and speed are really the things that we have to look out for, and that's really kind of what we've geared this presentation toward, is what can we do defensively to protect our cities, counties, and our employees while they're on the road. So that was a great question. Hopefully we'll cover and answer some of those things. So again, welcome. Apologize if you hear a little bit of buzzing. I think it's my computer fan is acting up. Hopefully it won't go out on me, but if you hear buzzing, that's probably what it is. So today we're going to cover really 2 things. The first topic is our motor vehicle defensive driving considerations for local government. And as we go through this, I want you to think about your own experiences as you've been out on the road driving, some of the things you've seen, some of the things that you have experienced. The county I work for, in our motor pool, had a sign just before people go out the gate in the morning, and the sign said, "You are about to enter the most dangerous place that you can while at work." And the answer was our public roads, and that's very true. So think about that for you and your employees. Driving is a habit. both good habit and bad habit. We tend to do the same things over and over again. And what we really need to do is think about what are our bad driving habits, both personally and in our workforce. So here's a couple of things that you may or may not have known. And think of those in terms of what I just talked about, distractions and speed. 1 in 10 workers text or email while they're driving, and many of you have policies preventing that, but I would think that some of your employees are probably still doing so. 76% of all workers are speeding, and in many cases up to 35 miles per hour over the speed limit. That's fast, okay? That's an unhealthy rate of speed anywhere. 42% of accidents are caused by just really not paying attention, failure to look. If you watch drivers on the road next to you, most of the time you rarely will see them use their mirrors. They're looking straight forward. Even if they're not doing hands-on with their cell phone, they've got the earbuds in and they're talking, they're looking straight ahead. They're not using the mirrors, they're not looking to the side. They're really not keeping aware of that valuable defensive space around their vehicle. 21% of accidents, failure to make the right judgment. And that would be things such as driving too fast for conditions. Maybe it's raining outside and the speed limit is actually too fast to drive, but also failing to judge some other things. Maybe the time of day that you're driving or the congestion that's out there. 16% of accidents are reckless driving, often caused by people being in just a hurry. And all of you have seen on the road, some of those rude people who cut in front of you, stop suddenly, do those other terrible things. And often they think the road is theirs, but often that makes us not only have to drive for ourselves, but drive for the other people as well. We also sometimes fail to adjust for the other conditions we encounter, the weather. Again, rain. In the wintertime, we've had several winters here in Georgia where we've had ice on the roads, heavy traffic, road construction, and also, if we are on a road and we clearly see people are impatient, what can we do to protect ourselves from those other bad drivers? Following too close. Before I was 21, I was in 7 collisions. Not a great testimony for me. I've gotten better, but following too closely was 5 of those. I just didn't seem to learn that particular lesson. And then not wearing a seatbelt. Georgia is a mandatory seatbelt use state. We encourage all of you to have mandatory seatbelt use policies, not just for your motor vehicles, but for any piece of equipment that has an occupant restraint system. That should be mandatory for all of your employees to wear that occupant restraint system. And as we look at these bullets here, think about, are any of these on your list? Are any of these bad habits on your list? So what does it cost when we have accidents? Well, certainly the number one cost would be if we actually had an injury to either our employees or a third party, a member of the public, somebody else, or worst case, a fatality. That's the worst case. And again, the speed conditions sometimes make these collisions, really terrible to behold. But that's one of the biggest costs. But we also have the damage done to either our property or somebody else's property or other people involved in the accident. So that's a big dollar cost right there. How about when we have to investigate these accidents? We talked in the first session about accident investigations. The second session, that takes time. If we're doing it right, that takes somebody away from their primary job, try and identify the root cause, do all the documentation, and then the follow through to make sure it doesn't happen again. So that's a lot of time away from what we're supposed to be doing. We also have to deal with the claim side of things. Again, employee injured, perhaps there's a workers' compensation claim process that has to go on. If there's property damage or automobile damage, then we have that general liability claim just to repair our vehicles and the other people's vehicles, but also sometimes litigation we have to deal with. If we're transporting materials, say a public works trailer is involved in an accident with work materials on board. If those are upended, if they are damaged, we've got to replace that, or the sometimes expensive pieces of equipment that are also being transported by those vehicles. And then we have other lawsuits and punitive damages that happen. So there's a big cost for local governments when we do this. So how would you think if you saw a headline tomorrow in tomorrow's newspaper that said 8 teenagers died and 960 injured taken to the emergency room from an airplane crash? And what if you read that headline every day of the week for an entire week? That's actually how many teenagers are killed and how many teenagers are injured every day during every week. Statistically, that's pretty bad. But we don't think about that because they happen, they're spread out. It's not just one airplane crash. You know, it's a collision over here that injured somebody. It's one over here or in another state that killed somebody. But we need to do the same focus, even though these injuries and the fatalities are spread out. We need to do the same focus to do everything we can to lower these statistics, to prevent injuries and fatalities from happening while we're on the road. So here's something some people, think accidents happen, right? They just happen. Nothing we can do about it. Well, that's not entirely true. And most research from most agencies that do some sort of defensive driving course, everything from the National Safety Council to the American Automobile Association, others, they look at a few things that are contributors to automobile crashes. And we have the list here. And we're going to talk about a few of these as we go through. But I want you to look at this list, and think of what each of these means. What does it mean to be a distracted driver? What are some of the things that you have done while driving? Or what are some of the things that you've seen other people do while they're driving? And it can be very irritating when you see somebody who's putting on their makeup or shaving or brushing teeth, or in some cases even watching videos while they're driving. How about fatigue? Anybody ever been inordinately tired and just, you just got to get where you're going and you drive anywhere? Impaired driving, it's not just alcohol related driving. It's also other drugs, and it doesn't have to be prescription drugs. It could be over-the-counter drugs or illegal drugs. A lot of people are out there driving under some sort of impairment, many of them not even realizing that's the case. And speeding. So how many of you have heard that it's okay to go 5 miles above the speed limit, or I won't get a ticket or get caught on radar as long as I'm going, not more than 10 miles over the speed limit? Well, people speed, and I want you to think about speeding. And again, we're going to talk a little bit about it in another slide, but the faster you go, the less time you have to do something, to put on the brakes, to see a hazard, to avoid somebody who's driving erratically. The faster you go, the less time. It's all about time and distance when we're driving. Then there's the aggressive drivers out there, the people who own the road, have no consideration for you whatsoever. They just, the road is theirs and you're an impairment to them. And then finally, there are some things like the weather, ice, rain, things of that nature. So of the 6 I have here, how many of these do you control? Which do you have some control over? Well, the answer is all but number 6. And even number 6, we have some control over if we're aware enough to maybe avoid driving in certain conditions. So again, think about your driving habits, good habits and bad. Look at this list. Look at where you may fall on this list. And keep in mind, it's often not just one of these issues. It's often several of these piled together. Particularly speeding is often involved in some of these other driver-related issues. So when we think about distracted driving, again, a growing problem. We have smart cars. They tell us how to park or park themselves for us. They tell us when we left the road map. They found that we have an increased level of cognitive zoning out. Our mind daydreams. Our car is doing something. It's going to warn us if we leave our lane, if somebody's too close to us. So we kind of daydream. In the past, it was cell phones that were really causing this, or just long drives. But maybe some of you have driven down the road and missed your exit because your mind was elsewhere. So again, always be aware when you're driving, your focus, your job should be driving that vehicle. So think about the cognitive side of things. Then there's the manual side of things. And again, our illustration here on the slide shows what all of us have seen out there, people doing other things besides driving. And again, good drivers keep both hands on the wheel. They keep their eyes moving from the rear mirror to the side mirrors to the front. They're looking at space, doing other things, changing a CD if you still have one, or plugging in your cell phone to charge it while you're driving is not a good idea. Driving with the knee does not work. So think about the manual distractions that you may be involved with. Or if you've got young kids, I don't know about you, when mine were young, I did turn around and tell them, don't make me stop this car. And again, I did that. I'm not focused on the road. Then there's the visual distractions where we take our eyes off the road. And again, I want you to think about what you may have observed other people doing. Have you seen anybody who's been reading a newspaper or a book or looking at their Kindle or Amazon tablet, whatever they might have? Do they have their cell phone in their hand? Are they sending a text? Even if it's hands-free, are they looking up an address while their cell phone is in the holder on the dashboard? We've seen people watching movies as they go down the road, putting on makeup, brushing teeth. I've seen people changing clothes. So anytime we take our eyes off the road, it only takes an instant for something to happen. At 50 miles an hour, your vehicle is traveling about 75 feet per second. So if you glance away for 2 seconds, your vehicle has traveled 150 feet. A lot can happen in that time frame and that distance. So we think about mental distractions, and there's a rating system they use, and I really like this chart because it does simplify things. Even if you've got your eyes on the road and your hands on the wheel, there are other things that happen in life that distract us mentally. And here's some good examples. Mild danger could be anything from listening to the radio or an audio book. Again, you're paying attention to the road, but you're also in that state of mind where you're also having to deal with whatever story and you're visualizing what you hear. Moderate danger would be talking on a handheld phone or even on a hands-free phone. There's not a whole lot of difference in what happens when we talk on a cell phone. We tend to get tunnel vision. We don't see as much or as wide a field of vision as we normally do because we are visualizing who and what we're talking to. And then high danger could be using voice-activated texting or email features where you're actually you do take your eyes off the road as you're looking at what people are saying. You could be reaching for something. So think about the mental distractions that happen to you on the road. And then think about what your employees may be doing, what you equip your employees with to do their job. Law enforcement, public safety in general, think about the technology that is part of their job in the car. Not only the automated data system that they have, the computer in every motor vehicle, but they also have radios. They've got other things that they're doing. They're looking maybe for a stolen car. So law enforcement particularly can have a lot of mental distractions out there. So think in terms of what your employees' jobs are when they're driving and what kind of distractions they may have out there. So speeding, it used to be, and I think it still is actually though, the number of miles driven over the last few months since March in the whole United States has gone down significantly, though it's picking up now. But speeding is the #1 cause of collisions. And here's what happens when you speed. If you hit an object or leave the road, the greater the speed, the greater the potential for some sort of damage or loss of control. The faster you go, the less effective the occupant restraint system is in the vehicle. The modern vehicles are amazing engineering items. They are built to protect people. But the faster you go, the more physics takes over, mass and weight, and the more damage can happen. We also need to think in mind, if we have to stop, the faster we go, the longer it's going to take us to stop, because it takes us about 1/4 of a second to perceive a hazard, maybe a car slowing down in front of us. It takes about another 1/4 of a second for our brain to say, okay, foot, get off, accelerator, hit the brake, and then it takes whatever speed we're going and the actual stopping distance of the car. And it may be that you are following too close because of the rate of speed you have, and you are not going to be able to stop in time. Again, if we're in a collision, the severity of the injuries that you or your passengers could face goes way up. The more damage happens to the vehicle, so the higher the cost of repairing it or replacing it might be. And then just nothing else, even though gas prices are way low right now, but the faster we go, the more fuel we use. And again, we just want to make sure that we have policies in place that limit people on what they're doing. Speeding is a choice. It's one that people can certainly moderate themselves in. So aggressive driving. And here's the definition of aggressive driving. And all you have to do is pick up the paper over the last year or two, and you can see where some aggressive driving instances have gotten really deadly and dangerous fast. People are angry out there for a variety of reasons, and all you have to do is give the wrong look or give some sort of a gesture with your hand, or even just yell through your windshield. Somebody takes a look if they're in the wrong frame of mind. You don't know who's driving that car. You don't know what their mental state is. You don't know things that are going on in their life, and they may just stop, or they may do something aggressive that puts your life in danger. 56% of fatal crashes involve tailgating, erratic lane change, or illegal passing, and these are all acts of an aggressive driver. So what should you do if you're around an aggressive driver? The best thing to do is slow down. If they want to get ahead of you, let them get ahead. Help them get ahead of you. If they're ahead of you, that's where you want them to be. You're much safer. If in extreme cases, if you feel like you're targeted by an aggressive driver, get off your roadway, find a public place, particularly if there's a law enforcement agency or a fire department nearby. That would be the safest place to go. But again, aggressive driving is deadly, and often, that's causes some of these other minor incidents that we have, following too closely, those rear-end collisions, things of that nature. Impaired driving. It's unbelievable. My whole life, there have been campaigns against drunk driving and later impaired driving in the United States. But in 2017, unbelievable, almost 11,000 people died in alcohol-related impaired crashes. That's 29% of all traffic fatalities. And it's not just the drunk driver or the impaired driver that gets killed. Often it's innocent pedestrians or other people in other vehicles that aren't doing anything wrong at all. 220 children 14 years old or younger were killed in drunk driving crash. That's about 1 in every 5 children who die in a traffic collision. This is one of the reasons when you're looking at hiring somebody who's going to be driving one of your vehicles, you want to do that motor vehicle record check. You want to identify if they've had any sort of driving issue in the past, and particularly if they've had any sort of impaired driving issue. We don't necessarily have to put a strict hard red line on not hiring anybody, particularly if the drunk driving incident happened years or decades ago. But if it's recent, if it's in the last 5, I would say even 10 years, you might want to think hard and fast before you bring somebody on board with any kind of an issue, because the first thing that happens in a collision, your fault, somebody else's fault, nobody's fault. If there's a plaintiff attorney involved, they're going to pull that motor vehicle record and they're going to use that. And that often will end up in us having to, if not go to trial, probably settle in a negative way toward us. So impaired driving is still an issue out there. So within local governments in Georgia, rear-end collisions are about the #1 most frequent accident that we have out there. 38% of all claims, averages $13,000 per claim. When a bumper is destroyed, it can't be repaired, it has to be replaced, and sometimes other components, which is why it's so expensive. So rear-end collisions, how do they happen? Well, there are 2 ways. #1, we're following too close. The National Safety recommends that everybody use what's called a 3-second following distance rule. In other words, when the vehicle in front of you passes a fixed object, you should be counting 1001, 1002, 1003 before you pass that same fixed object. That way, if they slam on the brakes, you have time to recognize the hazard, actually put the brakes, actually hit the brakes, and then actually have enough room to come to a stop before you hit them. So that's the #1 way to prevent that. The other thing that happens with rear-end collisions is backing out of parking spaces. So one of the best things you can do here, and often these happen, law enforcement, I don't want to hit law enforcement, this happens a lot with law enforcement. When they're backing out of the police station or the sheriff's department parking lot, they'll hit a sign or they'll hit another vehicle. And the reason for this partially is most modern law enforcement vehicles have very poor rear viewing options. You can't really see out the mirror, and it's very hard to see just by turning your head. But backing incidents also cause this. And again, there are ways to get around this. doing pull-throughs, pulling in or backing into a parking place so you can pull out frontwards would be one of the best ways to do this. And again, slowing down. So if you look at claims, total dollars, and here's a nice pie chart, but you can see rear end collisions really take up the majority of total loan of all dollars incurred from automobile losses. The other colors in the pie chart, failure to yield, failure to stop, loss control, other things of that nature, but rear end collisions account for most of them. And again, we talked about what you can do to possibly prevent that. So as employers, what do we need to do to change this dynamic, to change the losses on motor vehicles? Well, number one, it has to do with pre-hiring our employees. Before we hire anybody who's going to be a driver, we want to do that driver's license background check, that motor vehicle records check. And the state of Georgia has a process where you don't have to use your law enforcement agency data to do this, but for a one-time fee, you go to the state of Georgia and you can do these license background checks on prospective drivers before they're hired. You can see their history as long as it's available. There are other organizations out there that's a particularly sensitive driver that you're hiring that you can do background checks in multiple states and in multiple areas. So again, that background check before we give them the keys to a vehicle is a critical thing. The other thing is to have a written policy, and this written policy should say, and if you're going to get a GMA safety grant or an ACCG incentive, you've got to have a mandatory seatbelt use policy. Okay, requiring your drivers to use the seatbelts. And all of you have probably seen where people don't always wear their seatbelts. Sometimes, even if it's got an alarm that you're not wearing a seatbelt, they'll go ahead and lock it into the gate and put it behind them, or they'll just pull the thing around their arm to make it look like it. But the way you find out if people are using their seatbelts is by going around and looking. For our loss control reps, Steve and Vincent and Chris, one of the things I know many of them do when they visit your cities and counties is they'll get there a little early and they'll drive around observing some of your employees, and they'll look and see who's wearing seatbelts. If they see everybody or most everybody wearing the seatbelts, that's a good thing. And when they come and meet with you, they'll probably mention that and congratulate you on that. But if they see a lot of employees who don't seem to be wearing their seat belts, and they'll also mention that because there's an issue there that needs to be worked on. We also want to make sure that we train drivers in safe driving practices. And now it's even more particularly important to train them in the use of vehicle safety features. Technology can be a great thing, but it can also be a daunting thing with all the gizmos that modern vehicles have. We need to train employees how to use those. We can't assume that they automatically know how they function or what they actually do. And it really pays dividends to practice that and make sure people know. We also want to make sure that we're doing preventive maintenance, especially brakes, other safety systems such as tire pressure. And it needs to be emphasized for all vehicle operators, not just your maintenance people. It's not a maintenance person's job to make sure that you're not driving a vehicle with low tire pressure or with low brake fluid. Those are easy things that we all should be doing with our own vehicles, and we also should be doing that with our local government vehicle. So as employers, we need to have policies, we need to have training practices that encourage these things before we let somebody get on the road with one of our vehicles. So how should we do it? Well, enforce, educate, and document. And really, that's really what it comes down to. So if we have policy, we need to enforce the policy. If people aren't following policy, we need to find out why. Why aren't you wearing your seatbelt? Why are you always exceeding the speed limit? And then maybe our policy, there may be some badly worded parts of it that we may have to adjust. But sometimes it's a good policy. We just haven't been enforcing it. So if we haven't been enforcing it, we need to give notice. This is the policy. Train everybody what the policy is and say from this day forward, we're going to enforce the policy, and there'll be disciplinary matters that may happen as a consequence of you not following the policy. The costs are too high related to vehicle collisions to not make sure our people are doing the right thing. Educate, provide training, lead by example in training. Through LGRMS, when we can get back out and visit you in person, we have the 6-hour National Safety Council defensive driving course that we can give to all of your employees. You know, in some cases, we could even arrange to have it given to your employees' family members on certain circumstances. But by doing that, your employees not only are getting good defensive driving training, but they may also be eligible for a discount off their motor vehicle insurance. We also, on the law enforcement public safety side, we have our law enforcement driving simulators, or decision-based driving simulators. You know, that's a trailer-mounted driving simulator designed to put our public safety folks, fire, EMS, law enforcement, through a series of scenarios after having some classroom training where they actually have to make decisions on how they drive. And studies over time have shown that that has a significant effect on reducing accidents and bad driving. Then we need to also document our at-fault accidents. You know, through that accident investigation, incident investigation process, it's the same thing we need to document. And it may be our law enforcement agency that documents the motor vehicle accidents, but we need to make sure that we investigate those, and then we need to communicate what we found with everybody. So who's driving and should they be? Well, a couple of things you need to consider when you're looking at your motor vehicle fleet. We've already talked about the motor vehicle record, the history of a driver. Think about doing some pre-tests, particularly for some of your heavy equipment, your motor graders, your bucket loaders, things of that nature. You know, somebody may come from another local government and say, hey, I've operated a backhoe for 30 years. Well, that may be true, but maybe they don't operate it the way you want them to operate it. So do some pre-tests. Make sure they know what your policies and standards are. Make sure that you know which of your vehicles falls under the commercial driver's license program. You know, as a local government, you have some exemptions for some things, but not all. So you need to make sure that your drivers are adequately licensed for what they're doing. And then in your motor vehicle policy, does it cover these 4 things? You know, do you have a maximum speed, even for your public safety people, that they can go over the speed limit? Motor vehicle record checks, training, mandatory seatbelt use policy. So again, all these things are things you need to do not only before you hire somebody, but also periodically for people who've already been on your payroll for a while. So when things go wrong, what do? Well, number one, that accident investigation, which we already talked about, is a key thing, and then follow up. Maybe you have a vehicle inspection program where, you know, periodically you'll pull somebody's vehicle and do a preventive maintenance check, making sure that they're doing those basic things that every operator should do. If there is an accident, you should maybe have an accident review board that looks at it and decides, is this a fault or a not fault type of accident for your employee? Sometimes our employees get in accidents and it's not their fault. They've done everything they could do to avoid it, but it happened anyway, and they shouldn't be punished if that's the case. But if it wasn't at fault, then maybe we need to initiate some sort of disciplinary system that might be tiered depending on the number and severity of what happened. But we also want to do things like a positive recognition, maybe a safe driver program. Maybe if you got a driver who had no accidents in 10,000 miles, 100,000 miles, or 1,000,000 miles, you give them some sort of positive recognition, a gift card, a pen even for the hats, something like that. That positive feedback goes a long way. Get the message across. You know, emphasize defensive driving training. And again, we've talked about what we can offer. Also, through our Safety National online courses that you can access, there's some defensive driving training that you can use as well. Then technology. Make sure we know what technology our vehicles have and make sure our employees know how to use it. And then let's go out and observe what they're doing out there. You know, periodically look and see how they're actually driving. So in summary, for vehicles, always be aware there are people watching. There are people with cell phones, they're taking pictures. There's a big bullseye on every one of your vehicles that has not only your logo, but often a phone number to call so they know who's driving those vehicles. Choose your drivers. Make sure your guidance and direction are complete and understandable and that people are following them, and then practice and teach safe driving tactics. You know, and then that maintenance, I think, is a key thing. So go out there, make sure your drivers are safe, and you know, let's avoid these collisions. It's possible to do, and all we have to do is put emphasis on it. So we're going to shift right now. We're going to talk about, in a roundabout way, the ACCG and GMA incentive program by doing one of the required things that you have to do to be eligible for that, and that's talking about a safety action plan. Safety action plan is something that can be useful in all aspects of what you do. So really it's a tool, and it can help you develop a good safety culture within your various departments. It's not a hard thing to do. It's something that can help you really identify and validate the policies that you have. If you've got a problem, it also creates focus on that problem area. So why do you want a safety action plan? Well, here's a couple things. By doing it, you've identified the issue or the problem, and you can help your leadership understand why maybe you're having an issue in this area or that, why the claims are so high. We can also focus based on that plan on some meaningful control efforts that we can either reduce or mitigate what's happening. And then, we also have to keep in mind, just like in the accident investigation, our goal is not to find faults, to find the root cause. But by doing a safety action plan, maybe we can better protect our employees from a similar accident or incident. And again, if we can control the losses, then we can to some extent control what our premiums for workers' comp and our liability and property insurance are going to be. The less collisions, the less injuries you have, the lower those premiums will ultimately be. And again, we want to reduce the risk for our employees and family. And it gives us a way to kind of track how we're doing along the way. Correcting a significant safety issue that you have takes time, it takes persistent effort, and it takes consistency and application to make it work right. So for a safety action plan, again, if you're applying for the GMA safety grant, either through the GIRMA or the workers' comp program, or the ACCG incentive discount for the IRMA or workers' comp program, the safety action plan is part of the process. You can do it on your own, it's not that hard, but you can also contact your LGRMS loss control rep, and they can help you with your safety action plan, maybe help you focus on where you need to apply. So how do you do it? Well, this little chart here is a great way. You first have to identify, what needs to be improved. Have you got a department that's had a lot of slip, trips, and falls? Have you got a department that maybe has a lot of vehicle collisions, maybe a lot of rear end falling too closely collisions? So pick an area that needs improvement, but also keep in mind it's got to be realistic. You can't eat the elephant in one bite. You may have to start with small bites and correct a few things at a time. Most issues aren't just one thing. There may be multiple things that have to be resolved in sequence before the whole thing can be resolved. You want to make your plan action specific. Know exactly what you're going to do, how much or how often and when. Give yourself essentially goals. Identify what the issues are. Here's the issue. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to follow up? Get that specific with that. How often do we need to follow up? How often we need to look at this thing, and then plan ahead. Look at the barriers that may come up. Look at some of the things that may prevent you from being successful here. And some of these might be, well, to fix this, ultimately maybe a budget issue, which means we've got to go before the city council or the commissioners and say, hey, we need some additional funds to make these modifications or buy this piece of equipment to make this work. And then finally, you want to keep track of your progress. Not just a one and done. This is something that you can follow up on continuously, to include periodically going back once you've even resolved a problem and say, okay, we got that fixed a couple of years ago. Is it raising its ugly head again? If so, let's head it off before it becomes a problem. So creating your plan is the first step. So here's a very simple example of how that works. This is an exercise action plan. If you're in the health and fitness, this is a good thing. So walking or other aerobic exercise at least 30 minutes each day. Aerobic capacity is directly correlated with bone density and overall health. So that's the thing we want to do. And we're going to do it by doing strength training at least 30 minutes every day, doing that aerobic walking or running. And then finally, we're going to do a group exercise at least once a week, fun in both numbers and power. So we can do it for our personal lives as well. So when you're doing a safety action plan, there are 3 steps you want to follow. Step 1, we just talked about. You got to know what you're going to be doing your action plan on. And a good way to do that is to look at your losses. Maybe on your workers' comp side, You've got, as we said earlier, you've got a department that has a lot of slips, trips, and falls or back injuries. So if that's a trend, if that's an issue, then you know where your losses are. You can look at the accident or incident reports around those and kind of figure out what are the parameters of what happened. Then you need to analyze those things and, look at, by type and frequency. Is it something that's happening a lot, or was it kind of a one-off thing? But whatever you do, you got to know what it is that you're trying to fix before you can actually fix it. And again, your LGRNS field rep can help you with that loss analysis and help guide you in doing this. So again, focus area, maybe it could be your motor vehicle claims, ergonomic claims, any of these areas. So the action questions you'd want to ask, for example, for motor vehicle claims, how can we reduce our motor vehicle accidents, or how can we reduce our rear end collisions that we seem to be having a lot of? And then action items to maybe help you along the way. Maybe training's the answer. Maybe better background checks on your employees would be the action item you need to do, or periodic background checks, or maybe even periodic training. A lot of those things would go hand in hand with each other. So again, focus area, what questions would you need to ask for each? And then what's the action item that we actually need to do to figure out what's going on and come up with a solution? Step 2 would be to categorize, okay? We want to look at the level of severity if it's an injury, or the level of damage or cost of the damage if it's some sort of a property or vehicle issue. What kind of impact is that going to have either on the employee, on the department, or the city and the county, or on our citizens in some cases? So we want to rank the impact of severity levels in a low, medium, high level, because if we have severity and it's low, but we also have some that may be in the medium high category, maybe we need to focus on those medium and high categories before we hit the low area. So again, here's a nice chart where you have the probability of something happening on the left-hand column and then the impact of that happening. And so we can kind of go across, is it very unlikely to happen? So we can go across, and only when it gets to be maybe something that's very severe. It doesn't happen very often, but it could be severe. Maybe we'd want to do something about it. But if there's only a minor chance or a negligible chance, or even sometimes a moderate chance that it's going to happen, then maybe it's not something we need to address. So again, you can look at the probability from very likely to very unlikely, to the impact on the individual, the organization, the department, from negligible impact to severe impact, and kind of help you focus on where you need to spend your time and effort. Step 3 is prevention, okay? It's much easier to not have to do something about something that never happened. But again, we know things happen. So how do we prevent? Well, ultimately, if we're doing the action planning and we've resolved it, now our next step is to prevent it from happening again. And there are a number of things that we can do to help us with that. We can adopt some safety rules, where we can get our employees together and say, hey, you do the job every day. What are some of the things that could hurt you, and what kind of rules might we come up with to help protect you? Maybe we need to look at some personal protective equipment issues. Maybe we need to upgrade our visual protection, like our vests or uniforms with reflective surfaces. Maybe we need to increase our inspections in certain areas. Maybe we've been doing this job the same way for a lot of time. Now technology and tools and processes changed. Maybe there's another way to do this that we don't have to do necessarily. And then maybe if we have new equipment, what do we do with new equipment? Can't assume people know how to use it, so we might need to do some training before we let it out there for full-blown use. So again, if we think about how we can do this, if you look at this chart here, let's look at COVID right now. And again, we're going to talk about the most effective to the least effective way to treat this. So everybody knows I don't need to talk about COVID, but let's look at what we need to do. The best thing we could do is eliminate the probability of us even getting it. And to do that, we probably have to isolate ourselves from the whole world, maybe be with our family and stay home, but maybe not. But that way we would totally eliminate the potential for us catching COVID-19. Next thing that would be next most effective would be substitution. If I can't isolate, maybe there's a remote means of work. Maybe like we're doing here, we're doing more webinars or virtual training than we are in-person training. So that would be substitution. Engineering control. Well, if you've gone out to your doctor or some other places, You know they're taking a temperature check often before you go into the building, and they're asking you if you've been certain places overseas. They've asked if you have any coughing, sneezing, headache, or other issues, before they even let you in. And then the other issue here, engineering controls, we do frequent frequent hand washing and wearing that mask. Administrative controls. This would be in your policy and procedure area. And again, maybe our policy right now says we got to maintain social distancing in the workspace. We want to keep that 6-foot distance between us and another person. And again, we want to make sure we wash hands. And then PPE, the least effective, and I say it's the least effective because personal protective equipment relies on the individual to actually use it correctly. So use your mask when you go outside. And again, where this fails, how many of you have been out and seeing people with masks, but they've got it down over their mouth, their nose is uncovered? So again, the least effective way is PPE. But you find what works best along this upside down pyramid, and maybe there's a combination of things that you actually do. So there's a form that you will be sent out when you're required to do a safety action plan to apply for the grant or incentive. And this kind of looks like what it is. It's got the focus, what type of loss you're dealing with in department. And you're not limited to, you can have several items. And then you have the action item. What are you actually going to do about it? Who's responsible for it? Is there a target date or target dates for progress as you go along, and then a place where you update the status? Again, this has to be a working, living document, not something that you just do once and put aside. Make it work for you, update it or change it as necessary. And then always nice to have who the owners are to actually sign off saying, yes, I'm aware of this, I take responsibility of this, I'm responsible for getting it done. So the safety action plan would be a good way to do this. So, that's the safety action planning product. We went over that kind of quick. Again, your LGRMS loss control field rep can help you with it. But I want to talk about the two programs real quickly for ACC-GMA. Number one, ACCG has a safety discount program, and its requirements may vary each year, but essentially you could get potentially 7.5% on your workers' comp premium or 5% back on your property and liability premium. So if you're paying $100,000 a year for your workers' comp premium for your city or county, if you get the grant, you'll get potentially 7.5% of that back. Now it goes into your general budget, so it's not like you're getting a check for that amount of money, but if you know where it's coming from, then perhaps your county can move that back or some of it back into the safety program. You also have a workman's compensation grant through ACCG, and a grant, again, this can be something where you get an outright grant if you meet the requirements to provide funding for essential pieces of safety equipment. So that's a great program right there. Again, you can use this link, or you should be getting a booklet every year if your county showing what's in there. Some important dates here, and again, I don't want you to lag on this slide too much because these might change. They review the program every year with us, and there are some changes that made, but these are some of the key things to keep you on the lookout. And again, the general dates I think will be the same, and you will get a copy of all these slides at the end of these programs, so you'll have this to refer back to. Or again, just go talk to your field rep and they can give you that discount booklet. For the GMA safety grant, here are some of the requirements. One of your employees participate in at least one LGRMS sponsored training program, not including the safety coordinator program. It's got to be something else. We just recently did a personnel liability and we did a work zone safety program. Those would have counted. You've got to be current responses to any recommendations made by an LGRMS assistance visit. Somebody, which is why many of you may be here at this training, has to be designated and meet the training requirements as a safety coordinator. And then you've got to show proof of several different things that you're doing. Number one, that you're holding safety meetings or training. You've got a minimum of safety inspections you're doing to a year. Let's see, mandatory seatbelt use policy and a few other things. Again, your key elected official or administrative official has to sign off on these to make sure that you get those. So again, there's a GMA grant brochure that comes out every year along with the ACCG incentive program as well. So just be on the lookout for those. So the process, our boss, Dan Beck, is actually the manager of the incentive and the grant. So the applications come to him, the verification of receipts of purchased equipment come to him, and then he is the one that actually asks GMA or ACCG to cut the checks or authorize the discount off the premium. Usually once we get it, it takes really a couple of weeks to process. If you've got everything in order, you've got all the things required that you sent in, then it will go faster. If he's got to go back and ask you for some additional information, it may take a little bit longer. But, you know, it's a great program. I want you to think about some of the things for both programs that have been bought in the past. Snake boots, for those of you who live in South Georgia and work out in the field, reflective vests, cones, other items of safety equipment. On the liability side, there's been you know, training programs that have been approved and other things. So it's a great benefit to have as a member of either Georgia Municipal Association or the Association County Commission of Georgia. So that kind of fast and furious for us today. Please, at any time, you can shoot me an email if you've got questions. My name again is Dennis Watts at dwatts@lgrms.com. That's DWATTS@lgrms.com. Or, you know, send Steve Shields, Chris Ryan, or Vincent Scott email with your questions. So again, next couple of days, you'll be getting a copy of this presentation. If you haven't gotten your copies of the others, let us know. You'll also be getting a link to the video recording of this program. And again, just as Steve mentioned earlier, if you weren't able to make all 3 sessions over the last couple of weeks, we will be doing that makeup session on the 29th at 9:30 for session 1, 11 for session 2, and 1 o'clock for session 3. Steve, anything else that you have?
No, Dennis, on this end, we're all good. Just as Dennis said, if you've got any questions, just contact your field rep and we will work with you to help address them. With that, take care and have a tremendous Thursday.
Very good. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.